How are you doing?
I'm alright, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, I'm very excited to meet you because you're one of the few people that I've found speaks to my love of both literature and science because my background is English and biology. So
Uh,
it's nice to have
yes.
somebody who does both very, I don't know, cleverly in a way. I really enjoy that. So, anyway, so I have my questions are mainly focused on your books A is for Arsenic and Making of the Monster.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do need to find your Shakespeare book and read it at some point. I'm just having a problem finding it, but I'll find it somewhere.
I don't think it's out in the States yet. That might be
Oh,
why.
that's probably why then. Oh,
Yeah, it's
terrible.
out in 5th of May. So it's out in the UK. The warehouse where they store all these books is shut down. So
Oh no. Okay.
I
Well, that's
don't know
good
when
to
you'll
know.
actually get it. So.
So, my first question is just going to be kind of a basic, broad question for you. So, how do you pick your literature that you're going to write the story around? So, like Agatha Christie or Frankenstein. Like, how do you pick those and then say, I want to go deeper into that?
Oh, I think I pick books that I know and like for a start, or I suspect that I might like. And I do a lot of reading to judge whether there's enough science to actually discuss. Because although I love the books, my background is science, and I want to use the book as a vehicle to discuss science as much as I want to discuss the literature and the knowledge of the person who wrote those books. So I read quite a lot, and you find books that you think, oh yeah, there's something in there. I could talk about that quite a bit, and so then I write a proposal, and if my publisher agrees with me, then I do a heck of a lot more reading.
I love it. That's great. So, clearly, this genre, I don't even know what to call it, but this type of book that combines science and literature together is very, very unique.
Yeah, I don't know of many people who do this. I mean, there are people who
Exactly.
write about, history of science, history of medicine. There are people who write about literature, but there's not many people writing about both.
Right. And
Um,
so I was going to ask, like, how did you determine to write in this sort of vein of making it really appealing to both the book lovers but also the science lovers?
it's slightly devious on my part because I love science, and I'm a bit of a sort of evangelist about it. I want as many people to be enthusiastic about science as possible. So a sneaky way to do that is to pick a topic that people love, which is basically how to kill people or dig up dead bodies and reanimate them. So gory stuff. And then, when I'm faced with a room full of teenagers and you say, oh, I'm going to talk about science, you can watch them shut down. They're not interested. But if you stand up and say, I'm going to tell you how to kill people, they pay attention, and you can sneak in an awful lot of science around popular subjects. And I also want to try and break down a little bit of that barrier about, there are people who do science and there are people who do arts. It's a nonsense. You can be interested in both. So I like to combine them wherever I can.
That's absolutely fabulous. I like that. So I'm curious for your research process for each of these books. Did you have the same one, or how exactly did you go about researching? Like, I'm curious for A is for Arsenic for Agatha Christie's book. Did you have to read all 22 or 23 books that she has poison used, or did you?
Oh, I read all 83
Okay,
books.
and then kind of determined from there which ones you wanted to use.
Yeah, pretty much. I had some help. Some people have actually gone through and listed some of the poisons that she uses and what books they're in, so I could narrow it down. But actually, I wanted to go through everything because even if she doesn't make poison the focus of that particular plot, quite often she has very subtle references and asides in the background. So I wanted as big an overall picture as possible. So it was quite literally, I went to a second-hand bookstore with an empty suitcase and asked them to point me towards their Agatha Christie section, and I basically cleaned them out. So
I love it.
I trundled home with my suitcase full of Agatha Christie's. I read all of those, and then you start reading books about real life crimes, poisoning cases, as well as scientific works on physiology, poisoning, toxicology, things like that. And quite often you read one thing and that sparks an idea, and you go off and read something else, and you end up with a huge reading list, and you try and narrow it down to what is relevant to what you're trying to write.
That makes sense. Did you find anything interesting in reading all 83 Agatha Christie novels that you weren't expecting?
I'd read a lot of them when I was a teenager, and I think when I went back to them, I was a little bit worried that they wouldn't quite live up to my teenage enthusiasm for them. So the thing that I liked most was rereading them and appreciating just how good they are. They survived my teenage enthusiasm and my adult skepticism. They are brilliant.
They are. She's easily one of my favorite authors as well. That's why I picked up your book originally. So
yeah, there's a reason she's one of the best-selling authors ever.
Exactly. And you do a good job of showing that she's done her research, which is helpful as well.
Yes.
So switching gears and going over to your other book of Making the Monster, I'm curious, since you probably, if you're very thorough, and it sounds like you are, looked at the entirety of Mary Shelley's life and clearly have written about it, I'm curious if there was anything very surprising that you weren't expecting. I know for me as a reader, I was very surprised that she based the main character off her husband. But again, I wasn't expecting that. I'm just curious for you as a researcher, what was interesting? What was surprising with that process?
Actually, it was a bit different to Agatha Christie, because it is surprising that a 19-year-old woman with no formal education writes something like Frankenstein. I mean, that is extraordinary. And as far as I know, the first full-length novel that relies entirely on science for its fiction rather than sort of magical incantations and spells and supernatural. So the fact, finding out how she knew all of this stuff, and the fact that she lived at the most extraordinary time and had the most incredible group of friends and acquaintances throughout her life, that was quite extraordinary. Listening to Coleridge recite the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner himself in your father's study must have been incredible. But also, having all of these exciting scientific discoveries happening throughout your formative years, that you can capture that enthusiasm for science. But quite apart from all of that, Mary Shelley herself is just an extraordinary woman, an incredible survivor, absolutely badass. She's just amazing. So my appreciation for her went through the roof the more I found out about her.
Oh, absolutely. That definitely makes sense in your research. So as far as, researching for this book, did you clearly, you're talking about reanimation and that sort of thing, and probably found some interesting cases on body snatching and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what sort of the weirdest case you found was.
There was a case in London, and most of the body snatching went on in London and quite a bit in Edinburgh. Obviously, you don't want to draw attention to what you're doing because it's borderline illegal, but it is massively unpopular. So you want to be discreet. So they wrapped up bodies quite carefully. They kind of took packing cases and they mislabeled stuff, and they would leave it outside an anatomy school's back door. So it was all very discreet. And there's one anatomy school that one evening they opened up its back door to find a package outside, and they opened it up and it was full of wool and cheese and ham, and it was basically someone's grocery delivery. So somewhere else in London, someone was expecting balls of yarn, cheese and ham, and actually got a dead body.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, that was the most surprising. And we only hear about, unfortunately, the only bit that's been recorded is the delivery of ham and cheese. There is no account of whatever poor servant or person picked up this dead body thinking it was their grocery shopping.
Oh,
So that was quite surprising.
That is, wow. That I'm just floored, but that's very funny as well, and you can just imagine what they were going through.
Yeah.
So you talked about having your Shakespeare book you said it's being released or it's newly released?
It's released on 5th of May in America.
Okay, perfect. So I'm curious, I haven't clearly read the book, but I'm curious, like, what Shakespeare play was the most interesting for you to research for that?
Oh, there were quite a few that I wasn't very familiar with. So it was really nice to actually get to know all of his work. And there's obviously, we study it in school, and I'd seen quite a few, and I'd read some, but there were ones that I just knew nothing about. So there was The Tempest. The Tempest I knew virtually nothing about. I'd never seen it, I'd never read it. So I sat down to read it for the first time, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It's amazing. And then the more and more research I did about it, I thought it was just an extraordinary play. But this is the joy of Shakespeare. The more you read around Shakespeare and understand more about what was going on in his life and the context of when it was written, there are all these amazing references to things like malaria and disease. And I found that fascinating, because malaria as a disease, we don't really think about it much in the West. We probably should, but we don't, because it's not common anymore. But in Shakespeare's day, malaria was still a thing in England, and it killed lots of people. So all of these subtle references would have been easily understandable by Shakespeare's audience, but we've kind of lost that along the way. So it's really nice it's almost like getting insider knowledge, having the inside joke, and getting all of those clues. That's one of the plays that it was most apparent for me.
Sure. And, this book is newer, but I'm curious, as far as moving forward, do you have an idea for your next novel, or are you still reading books and trying to find the one that kind of tickles your fancy?
Oh, I am midway through writing one, and I have a deadline for another one. So the next 2 books are lined up at the moment, and I have post-it notes all over my office of ideas of what I could write about. I'm never short of ideas. They're just not always very good. So if I just keep generating them, somewhere in there might be a good idea. So the one I'm writing about at the moment, I'm looking at the science of vampires, and if vampires could exist, and where all of these stories in literature and films come from. And the book that I will write after that will be basically all the ways to die in James Bond.